Hello my friends, in today's video we will take a look at my 9-lens kit for Sony A7IV, A7R4A and A7III. This will basically be an updated version of my 5-lens kit video from the last year. Since then I have added 4 lenses to my kit and I have started to use them with A7R4, which significantly increased the requirements for the optical quality. This is my personal kit based on my long-term lens testing on this channel. That means that this video will be influenced by my personal choices, so please keep that in mind. Let's start with wide-angle lenses. NiSi 15mm f4 is one of the most surprising lenses that I've ever tested. It is actually a 14.5mm lens which provides a very dramatic angle and field of view. It is an f4 manual lens, but it has 3 unique features that can compensate for that. First of all, the optical qualities are excellent. The sharpness is outstanding right from f4 across the frame. It is more than sharp enough even for a 61 megapixel sensor. The focus ring and aperture ring are a joy to use as well. Unique feature of this lens are straight aperture blades, which means that you will get sun stars at any aperture. It also has standard filter thread, which is unusual at this focal length, and basically no focus breathing. The negatives are the lack of weather sealing gasket around the mount and 470 gram weight, but that is partially offset by fully metal construction and excellent build quality. Overall, it is a great lens for landscapes and interiors at a very reasonable price point. Sony FE 20mm F1.8 G and 24mm F1.4 GM are easily 2 of my most favorite lenses of all time. 20mm F1.8 G provides a very wide angle, but not extremely wide by today's standards. It doesn't put that much emphasis on the foreground as the 16mm, for example. I really like to use it for cities and landscapes. It is also my favorite focal length for gimbal use. This angle puts more emphasis on the foreground movement, it is quite immersive and also easy to stabilize. Despite that it is an ultra-wide f1.8 lens that weighs just 370 grams, it is still perfectly sharp across the frame right from f1.8, even on a 61 megapixel sensor. The optical character, including the contrast and even the bokeh, is very pleasant. Size to performance ratio of 20mm G is off the charts. F1.8 aperture makes it very suitable for low light. The build quality is on par with GM primes. It is made of high quality plastics, which I don't mind in this case. It also has full controls, including the aperture declicking switch, custom button and AF/MF switch. 20mm G only has one weakness, and that is the focus breathing, which is pretty bad for video use. A7IV can completely fix that if you are willing to accept some crop. 24mm GM is a very special lens. This one has a very unique optical character. It just shoots beautiful pictures. It has excellent contrast and color rendition. 24mm focal length is, in my opinion, wide enough to provide an interesting perspective, but at the same time not too wide for walk-around use. 24mm f1.4s are difficult to make. On a 61 megapixel sensor you need to stop it down a little bit to get the maximal sharpness. Then you will get excellent image quality across the frame. At f1.4 it is still more than usable for blurring the background and low light use. On a 33 or 24 megapixel sensor you will get great sharpness even at f1.4. 24mm GM has 11 aperture blades and, in my opinion, by far the best bokeh of all wide-angle lenses. 24mm f1.4 allows you to significantly separate the subject even at this wide focal length and get a very unique look. The build quality is the same as with 20mm G, so it is made of high quality plastics. It also has full controls, including a declickable focus ring, AF/MF switch and a custom button. 24mm GM has 2 weaknesses. The first one is again the focus breathing, which can be fixed on A7IV. The second weakness is moderate amount of chromatic aberration at f1.4, but it isn't terrible. Despite that, it is easily one of my top 3 favorite lenses that I've ever used. I currently use 2 standard zooms: Sigma 24-70mm f2.8 DG DN and Tamron 28-75mm f2.8 Di3 VXD G2. Sigma 24-70mm f2.8 DG DN is simply a very good standard zoom. 24 to 70mm is the classic versatile focal range suitable for everything from landscapes to portraits, so there is no need to talk about that. Out of the zoom trinity, I use 24 to 70 the most, so here I want and need that f2.8 aperture. Optically it is again excellent. Even on a 61 megapixel sensor it is very sharp at any focal length right from f2.8. There is actually very little increase in sharpness if you stop it down because it can render even 61 megapixels right from f2.8. I can basically give it the perfect sharpness score across the frame even with 61 megapixel sensor. The optical character is also very nice. It has plenty of contrast and accurate color rendition. The rendition of bokeh is quite pleasant for a standard zoom, just don't expect it to match f1.4 primes. It does rely on profile corrections, but it is so sharp that it doesn't even affect the corners. It is 125mm long and it weighs 830 grams, which is adequate for 24 to 70mm f2.8. The build quality is excellent, just like with other Sigma art lenses. Zooming action is actually a lot smoother than on most first-party standard zooms, although it means that you will have to use the zoom lock to prevent so-called lens creeping. The autofocus is basically as good as with the latest Sony lenses. It is 100% accurate, very fast, and there are no firmware issues even with the latest Sony cameras. Sigma has improved the weather sealing on the new copies, so the dust gathering issues should be solved. If that is the case, I don't see any negatives. Sigma 24 to 70 DG DN offers performance that surpasses most first-party standard zooms for half of the price. It is one of the best products that I've ever tested. Despite that, I bought the new Tamron 28 to 75mm f2.8 Di3 VXD G2. The reason for that is that I have missed the low weight and the balanced of 540g f2.8 standard zoom. Basically the whole theme of this lens is that it sacrifices 4mm on the wide end in exchange for compact and lightweight packaging and lower price. Optically it is excellent. It is as good as the Sigma even with a 61 megapixel sensor. You can use it anywhere from f2.8 to f11 at any focal length without worrying about the sharpness. Despite a common belief, the bokeh on 28 to 75s is completely fine. It is very similar to Sigma 24 to 70. The build quality has been improved a little bit, but I still can't say that it is the most premium feeling lens. I appreciate the addition of a custom button and USB-C port for firmware updates though. The zooming action is also much better in comparison to G1. There are currently some issues with the autofocus in video on A7IV. It is accurate but not smooth. It works great with A7III though, so I hope that it will be fixed by a firmware update as soon as possible. Other than that, it is a great standard zoom very suitable for users who are willing to sacrifice 4mm on the wide end in exchange for a lighter and more compact package. The second lens that I have added to my kit in the past year is Samyang AF 35mm F1.8 FE. 35mm is a very versatile focal length suitable for anything from landscapes and cities to environmental portraits and even product photography. This 35mm f1.8 is just 63.5mm long and it weighs 210 grams, so it is properly compact. The build quality is completely fine. It feels as solid as it can at 210 grams. It is even weather sealed. The optical qualities are very solid considering the size. F1.8 is more than suitable for blurring the background and low light use. From f2.8 you will get excellent sharpness across the frame. The autofocus works as good as with the latest Sony lenses. Basically the only weakness is the focus breathing, which is in my opinion a very reasonable compromise to achieve that compact size. Samyang's 35mm f1.8 is also very budget friendly and one of the lenses that make crop systems a bit of a tough sell nowadays. I have recently added another f1.8 prime to my kit and that is Viltrox AF 50mm f1.8 FE. To be honest, I don't shoot at 50mm that much, so I was looking for something with a good price to performance ratio. 50mm f1.8 from Viltrox is very sharp in the center of the frame right from f1.8. There is a moderate amount of chromatic aberration though. The corners are just okay at f1.8, which is fine because f1.8 will mostly be used for blurring the background. From f2.8 you will get pretty good sharpness across the frame, and from f4 you will get excellent image quality. The bokeh is pretty nice as well. The build quality of Viltrox lenses is actually very good considering the price. The whole construction is metal including both rings. The autofocus also works with no issues. The downsides with this one are the lack of weather sealing gasket around the mount and clickless aperture ring, but that is not a big deal. At that price point I can't really complain about anything else. Another special lens in my kit is Sony FE 90mm f2.8 G OSS macro. This is my most used lens with A7R4A. I use it for all of my product photography on this channel. It is also useful for portraits or even telephoto landscapes. The sharpness with 61 megapixel sensor is phenomenal right from f2.8 across the frame. It stays this sharp until f11. The overall rendition and the contrast are just beautiful. Another special characteristic of this lens is the bokeh. It is not an f1.4, but at 90mm on the full frame you can get very pronounced subject separation even at f2.8. The rendition of the bokeh and the transitions are extremely smooth. Even with busy backgrounds you won't really get any harsh outlines. This is a real macro lens, so it provides 1:1 or 100% magnification. I use that mostly for wristwatches, flowers, and for details on cameras and other electronic devices. The sharpness and all other optical qualities at the minimum focus distance are just as good as when focused to infinity. In terms of the build quality, it is very good. The outer construction is fully metal and it has a fantastic focusing ring with hard stops and full controls. It is weather sealed, but it doesn't have a gasket around the mount, which is my only complaint with this lens. Another nice feature is the stabilization. That is extremely important when shooting handheld close-up images. Of course, it is also useful for other situations. The autofocus is a bit slower than with the latest Sony lenses, but it is still fine for everything except for tracking of fast-moving subjects. Overall, I am extremely happy with this lens and I use it as much as I can. It is also one of my top 3 most favorite lenses that I've ever tested. The last lens in my kit is Sony FE 70-200mm F4 G OSS. F4 on a telephoto lens is sufficient for my purposes. The optical performance is solid, but it isn't quite as sharp as the standard zooms that I use, but I still can say that it is a very good lens. You may need to stop down to f5.6 if you need full sharpness in the corners, but that's about it. The contrast is also very solid and the bokeh is quite nice. The subject separation at f4 is also sufficient for me, especially around 200mm. I mostly use 70-200 for getting a different perspective when shooting landscapes and cities. 70-200 is out of the range of the smartphones, so I think that this kind of telephoto shots have a bit more distinctive look to them. In terms of the build quality, I don't really have any complaints. It is made of high quality plastics and it has some metal parts. It also has complete controls including AF/MF switch, stabilization controls and custom button. It is an internal zoom lens which is good for weather sealing and dust protection. It weighs 840 grams and it is 17.5 centimeters long, which is adequate for this type of lens. Importantly, 70-200 f4 has a very effective optical stabilization which works together with in-body image stabilization in Sony cameras. 3 things that I don't like about this lens is that there is no gasket around the mount, the minimum focus distance is not that great, and it is not possible to use it with a teleconverter. Despite that, out of the E-mount options, it is currently the best compromise for me. So these were the lenses that I currently used with full-frame E-mount cameras. I am considering getting 2 more lenses. One is Sony FE 200-600mm f5.6-6.3, and I am still looking for an ultra-wide zoom, which might be Sony FE 12-24mm f2.8 GM. Despite that this video was more about my personal preferences, I hope that it was useful and maybe somehow inspirational. So that's it for today, thank you for watching, I hope that you liked this video and that you have found it to be useful. Stay tuned for more videos and maybe consider subscribing if you don't want to miss my future content. I appreciate your feedback in form of thumbs up or thumbs down. If you would like to ask anything or share opinion, please do so in the comment section and see you next time.